This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News, and coming up on the political correction today, we're discussing the ongoing war in Ukraine as talks of a ceasefire continue with Russia. After Joe Biden's first State of the Union address, we look at the political landscape across the pond. And we discuss a report which argues for a different approach to drug use at universities in the UK. That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Russia says safe passage corridors are open again until 9 p.m. local time to allow residents of the Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Volnovakha to evacuate. It follows the collapse of an attempted ceasefire yesterday amid continued shelling. The UK is accusing Russia of using the temporary suspension of hostilities to regroup its forces. A new round of talks between Russia and Ukraine is due to start tomorrow. British expat Thomas Jones has had to leave everything behind in Ukraine.
We managed to leave Ukraine last Saturday. Long queues, lines, panicking people, crying children. It was not something to be repeated.
The Ministry of Defence is accusing Moscow of targeting populated areas in Ukraine. In an intelligence update, the MOD says Russia's bombardment is being compared to tactics seen in Chechnya and Syria. Moscow denies it's targeting civilians. Analysts say the strength of Ukrainian resistance is slowing the Russian advance in the country. In a video address, President Zelensky praised his citizens for their efforts.
It is a special heroism to protest when your city is occupied, even temporarily. When you don't have a weapon, and in response to your protests, they shoot at you, but you don't run. When you're not armed, and an armoured personnel carrier is coming at you, but you do not move aside. That is why the occupation is temporary. It is artificial.
Well, Dominic Raab says the conflict in Ukraine is likely to last months, if not years. The Deputy Prime Minister told Sky News he also rejected Putin's likening the West's sanctions to a declaration of war. It's as Boris Johnson called on world leaders to make a renewed effort to ensure the Russian leader fails. The Prime Minister unveiled a 6-point plan, which ranges from humanitarian support to inflicting more economic pain on Moscow. Mr Johnson is due to host leaders from Canada, the Netherlands and Central Europe in London next week. President Joe Biden says the US is ready to increase its support in Ukraine and toughen its sanctions against Russia. In a phone call with President Volodymyr Zelensky overnight, Mr Biden said he was working to secure extra funding to provide humanitarian, economic and security assistance. The two also discussed increasing the economic sanctions imposed on Moscow. Visa and MasterCard are suspending all operations in Russia in response to its invasion of Ukraine. MasterCard said cards issued by Russian banks will no longer be supported by its network. and any card issued outside the country will not work at Russian stores or ATMs. The Visa chief executive says they've been compelled to act after the unacceptable events witnessed in Ukraine. This is GB News. We'll bring you more at the top of the next hour. Now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is the political correction. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. This is not about journalists talking to journalists, it's about you telling us what you think. Coming up this hour, 400,000 residents trapped in Mariupol in Ukraine will be able to leave from midday under a temporary ceasefire that will last until 9 p.m. this evening. Yesterday, a similar plan was abandoned after the ceasefire was not fully observed. The Prime Minister comes up with a 6-point plan to defeat Putin and hopes world leaders will get behind it. Meanwhile, the Russian president described sanctions imposed against his country as akin to a declaration of war, while our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, tells the Kremlin, don't test us. Plus, later in the programme, we discuss US President Joe Biden after he delivered his first State of the Union address this week. Now, as always, we want to hear from you here on The Political Correction, so get involved by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. So to bring you up to date with the latest coming out of Ukraine, council officials in the port city Mariupol say humanitarian corridors will open again following yesterday's ceasefire collapse. Civilians will be able to evacuate along an agreed route from midday local time. Well, here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to set out a 6-point plan of action on the Ukraine conflict to ensure Russia's invasion fails. It's reported that his plan includes the mobilisation of an international humanitarian coalition for Ukraine, supporting Ukraine in its efforts to provide its own self-defence, increased economic pressure on Russia, resisting Russia's creeping normalisation of its military actions. Diplomatic resolutions should be explored by the international community. NATO should seek a rapid campaign to strengthen security and resilience. Well, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace issued a stark warning to Vladimir Putin not to underestimate the West, while the Russian leader said Western sanctions are equivalent to declaring war. My first question, Paul and Darlene, is what did you make of Putin's comments there that the actions of the West are akin to war? Paul?
Well, I guess that's rhetoric, and that's something that we're used to from Putin, to be fair. But, you know, at the end of the day, we do need a situation where Russia withdraws its troops. This is clearly a war of aggression. There's no question about that. But we also need, I think, a settlement for those areas in eastern Ukraine, those Russian where lots of ethnic Russians are, the separatist areas as they're called, because there is evidence unquestionably, I think, over recent years of mistreatment of some of those ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine. So for me, just simply demanding the withdrawal of troops and a ceasefire, whilst that, you know, is of course right, we need to do more than that, and we need to look at the reasons why the conflict exists in the first place. I don't think we've been particularly good in this country examining some of the core reasons for the conflict. I don't think we've been good at perhaps recognising that there are some grievances from the ethnic Russians in the east. And we need to, I think, get some sort of settlement based on the Minsk agreement, which was designed to give some sort of autonomy to those regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. So look, on the one hand, I think you can clearly say it's a war of aggression. It's absolutely wrong, and Russia should get out of Ukraine. It's no business being there. But we've also, going forward, got to look at a way of reaching a settlement that delivers on, one, safeguarding Ukraine's status as a sovereign territory, but also looking at the concerns of ethnic Russians, which have not been properly addressed.
And we've heard Putin sort of making veiled threats of potentially pressing the nuclear button. What do you make of that, and how worried do you think we need to be about it here in the West?
Look, I mean, whenever any leader of any big power uses the nuclear word, then of course it is a concern. I suspect in this case there's probably quite a bit of posturing going on. I think, the whole point about nuclear weapons, it's mutually assured destruction, isn't it? It would be absolutely crazy for any leader to use nuclear weapons when it knows that it's likely to be on the receiving end of the same thing. So I think that this is just Putin deciding to ramp up the rhetoric, to send a warning shot across the bows of the West. And I think there's two ways the West can approach this, really. It can either respond in kind, and it can start sabre-rattling itself, or it can try and take the heat out of that situation and say, look, we're not going to get involved in that sort of talk, in that sort of game, that sort of posturing. There's a very serious issue going on here. A country has been invaded. We need to make sure that those troops are withdrawn and reach a settlement and leave all the rhetoric to Putin.
Well, Arlene, we've heard there the Prime Minister in his six-point plan talking more about sort of diplomatic solutions. Do you think it's realistic that we can achieve a diplomatic solution to this conflict?
Well, I hear what Paul says about the eastern provinces, and undoubtedly there's been a problem there since the invasion of Crimea, and there's been issues raised. But I think actually by invading the whole of Ukraine, Putin has made it even more difficult to deal with that particular problem. And rightly, the Ukrainians will want to protect all of their territory now. The war isn't going as well as Putin thought it would be. We're told that he thought he would be able to take Kyiv in a short, sharp burst of activity. That hasn't happened. And the Ukrainians are certainly putting up a very spirited fight. But look, I think we have to understand that this is Russia we're speaking about. And therefore, even if he were to win in Ukraine, and we've heard the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab today say that this war might last for months, even years, even if he were to win in Ukraine, how is he going to, as we often say in Northern Ireland, you can win the war, but how are you going to deal with the peace? And are you really suggesting that those Ukrainians who have fought in such a way to protect their sovereignty are just going to roll over and allow Russia to put in a puppet, if you like, as president or prime minister? So diplomacy is absolutely part of what we need to be involved in, but we do need to support the Ukrainians through making sure that they have access to lethal weapons and also, of course, in the humanitarian aid. I think the Prime Minister and his six-point plan is very much putting out there that the UK is leading the way in the response. I think that's very positive for the UK. And I think the PM has stepped up to the mark in dealing with what has been a horrific time for those people living in Ukraine.
Well, one of the things that the Ukrainian government have been calling for is for NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which at the moment is being resisted on the basis that if a Russian plane was shot down, the Russians would consider that an act of war against them. Arlene, would you support a no-fly zone being imposed?
No, I don't. And I say that having interviewed a Ukrainian female MP on Friday on my own show, and she was very, very upset that the West and NATO were not coming forward with proposals for a no-fly zone. And she's, it was a very emotional interview that she gave around all of that. But I think that that sort of escalation will bring us into a war situation between NATO and Russia. We do have to do all that we can to support Ukraine. We do have to do all that we can to make sure that NATO is prepared if Putin decides to push this even further. We have to give humanitarian support. But I think it would be wrong to put a no-fly zone into Ukraine at this present moment in time. We need to try and find a solution to what's happening there on the world stage. And to be fair, I think, as I've said, PM is pushing for that.
And Paul, would you agree with that? Would you like to see a no-fly zone implemented?
No, I can't think of anything worse than having a no-fly zone. Essentially, it would just up the ante. And the moment, NATO forces or whoever it was came into contact with a Russian jet or shot down a Russian jet, you are potentially into World War III territory. And that's not hyperbole. I think that's where we potentially find ourselves. So, I mean, on the one hand, look, you can perfectly understand Ukrainians who feel completely under siege demanding that Western partners come to their aid and implement the no-fly zone. And no doubt if we were in that position, we'd be making the same demand. But actually, from our point of view, I think we have to look at the broader politics of the whole thing. And, I've been slightly concerned to hear some commentators you might otherwise regard as being sensible make this particular demand. Because for me, there would be no other outcome than you're into a conflict between the West and Russia, and who knows then where that might go. We've already talked about the potential for nuclear weapons to be used. We hope that wouldn't happen, but that would certainly increase the chances. So it's an absolute no-brainer for me, and I cannot imagine why otherwise sensible people are even raising it as a prospect.
I think it's really understandable that the Ukrainians are, though, seeing what's going on with the jets flying over, the missile strikes and other now seemingly larger bombs being dropped on some of those Ukrainian cities. I think it's been interesting today seeing the Foreign Secretary's interview in the Express, if either of you caught it, where she referred to the conflict in Ukraine as the struggle of our generation to protect the values of freedom and democracy. And I think, I would completely agree with that statement. But the thing that I found particularly interesting that she said was talking about how the impact here in the UK on things like energy prices. People are understandably concerned about the cost of living, but the Foreign Secretary saying people may have to pay more, but it's nothing like the cost that the Ukrainian people are suffering. And I'd be curious, viewers at home, send us your thoughts. Are you willing to pay a little bit more for your energy bills in the sense that we are helping Ukraine defend their sovereignty and defend their freedoms? Because the impact at home is going to be pretty big, isn't it, Paul?
It is, but, unquestionably it is in terms of fuel prices potentially, etc. But at the same time, I think we need to avoid hyperbole. I mean, that kind of presentation by Liz Truss as this being a battle between, good and evil, as if there are very, very clear lines there. Well, look, there's no question it's a war of aggression. There's no question Putin is a ruthless, tyrannical dictator. I don't doubt that for a second. But, as I've said before, too few people in this country, I think, are examining the backstory to the reasons why we find ourselves where we are today. We do need to have a debate about NATO expansion. That doesn't mean to say that because NATO is looking to expand westwards, that gives Putin some sort of right to march into those countries. But, the idea of not expanding right up to Russia's borders was something that over the years has united the likes of Gorbachev and Henry Kissinger. There are serious people who think that the move by NATO up to the borders of Russia was not a particularly wise one and was inviting this sort of response, in the same way that if there was a Russia-China military alliance that planted itself on America's doorstep in Mexico or something, the reaction from America would probably be the same. So, and I do think we also need actually to discuss the nature of Ukraine as a country. I mean, there are many good people and politicians inside Ukraine, but there's also a lot of corruption inside Ukraine. There's a lot of ultra-nationalists operating inside Ukraine. The president himself has shut down TV stations in Ukraine. It is not above that kind of type of style of government, that kind of corruption. So this kind of depiction as all good on one side and all good, all evil on the other, isn't accurate, and we need to avoid that. It's not helpful in the long run in terms of the debate.
We spoke there about hyperbole, Paul, and I think one of the things that we want to discuss is this sort of sense of Russophobia, with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov accusing the West of engaging in a Russophobic frenzy after prominent figures both in the EU and the United States called for Russian citizens to be removed from their countries. That included Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who proposed kicking every Russian student out of the United States to send a message to Putin. But where do we draw the line? And is it fair to penalise ordinary Russian citizens for the actions of their leaders? Arlene, what do you make of that?
Well, no, it's not. And I mean, I know that there are Russians living here in Northern Ireland, and I wouldn't want them to feel that they were isolated at this time and that they were being identified as being supporters of Putin, because I know that they're not. So I do think we need to be careful around all of this, this sort of identity politics taken to the nth degree, where if you're from a certain place, then obviously you're a Putin supporter is completely wrong, and we need to call that out. I can completely understand why we have taken the action in relation to sport, in relation to those sorts of issues, because that hurts the Russian country as such. But when we start identifying individual, ordinary Russian citizens who live and maybe have dual status here in the UK, I think that is a problem, and we need to be very careful about that.
I mean, we've even seen now a cat shelter, isn't it, saying that something about Russian cats not being allowed. I think it is getting a little bit much. But Paul, what do you make of it? Because you and I have discussed before this sort of sense of Russophobia perhaps kind of being exposed as a result of this conflict.
I mean, look, targeted sanctions are one thing on the oligarchs and on Russian politicians, etc. But some of the stuff that we're seeing, I think, frankly, is completely over the top. Russia being banned from the Tree of the Year competition, as you said, Russian cats being banned from competitions, 16, 17-year-olds Russian players in the Russian and Belarusian players in the Canadian Hockey League being banned from playing. You know, it just strikes me, actually, that it's completely the opposite to the approach we took, for example, after 9/11 and 7/7 in this country, where the general sentiment, quite rightly, was, look, not all Muslims are responsible for the acts of an extreme minority. We certainly should not punish every Muslim for those terrorist attacks. But it seems to me that when it comes to this, we're doing the very opposite. We're saying, well, actually, all Russians are fair game. Everything and anyone Russian is fair game. And it almost is some sort of collective punishment. We're saying that Russian citizens are effectively responsible for the actions of their government. I mean, I have to say the two Tory MPs, Diana, who called for Russians to, well, certainly one more explicitly than the other, called for all Russians to be deported. I mean, it struck me as a terrible and authoritarian and tyrannical thing to say that, you know, many Russians in this country will unquestionably oppose Putin. And the idea that those people should be sent home simply because their leader has launched a war of aggression, I think is appalling. So we need to take the heat out of the situation. We need to understand that there are many decent Russians in this country. Not everybody and everything Russian is responsible for what's going on. And we need, frankly, a level-headed approach to it.
I mean, even in Russia, there have been huge protests against Putin's actions on this, haven't there? With, you know, tons of people taking to the streets. Arlene, do you think ultimately it could be the sort of response of the Russian people in Russia that could bring an end to this conflict?
Well, precisely that. I mean, we should be supporting those Russians who don't support Putin and don't support what he's actually been involved in, and to try to point out what it will mean for the world. And I've also been very taken by that UN vote, Diana, if you don't mind me mentioning that happened on Wednesday last week. And we were all celebrating the fact that a huge number of countries voted against what happened in the Ukraine. And that's right. But we should also look not just at those people who voted against, there were only 5 that voted against, but there were a considerable number of countries that abstained. And I find that very concerning, because we're talking about places like South Africa, like India, big countries with huge populations. Why do they feel that they cannot vote against what is very clearly an act of aggression against a sovereign nation? And I think that is very concerning, and I hope that our Foreign Office are looking at that vote and analysing, and Paul has talked about analysing what's happening in Ukraine and Russia in connection with the minority peoples that live there in terms of their identity. But we need to be asking ourselves the question, why did those people in India, why did the leadership in India and in China, well, maybe we understand China, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but in South Africa, actually quite a bit of Africa did not vote, and huge swathes of South America did not vote on it as well. Why is that the case, and should we be concerned about that?
Well, send us your views on everything that we've discussed so far. And coming up after the break, we're discussing what the ongoing situation in Europe means for China. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Now, Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping met face-to-face ahead of the Winter Olympics held in Beijing last month. And Jinping declared there was no limit to his country's newly strengthened relationship with Russia. This was, of course, before a full-scale invasion of Ukraine commenced. And many onlookers feel that China are now in a difficult situation diplomatically. China, alongside India, was one of 34 nations that abstained from voting on a UN resolution that condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They've yet to condemn nor condone the attack and have said they will not interfere in the internal affairs of others. So what does war in Europe mean for China, and could it potentially affect their relationship with Taiwan, who Beijing sees as a rogue province? Joining us to discuss this now is Steve Tsang, the director of the SOAS China Institute. Steve, thank you for joining us this morning. What is your analysis of the fact that the Chinese leadership have stayed very quiet over the situation in Ukraine?
Well, I think the Chinese government is staying quiet because Xi Jinping was slightly misled when Putin was in China. I think the Chinese leader worked on the assumptions that whatever actions Putin was going to take would happen, first of all, after the Olympics, which has come true. And the second one would be that it would not harm Chinese interests in Ukraine, which probably would have implied whatever actions over Ukraine would be very quick, very effective, and very efficient. And therefore, a change of government from one that is already friendly to China to one that is under Russian control would be perhaps even more friendly to China would materialize. And the failure of Putin to deliver means that the Chinese are finding a bit of limits to their unlimited friendships to the Russians.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that that relationship has been strained given the current situation?
Well, the relationship is a bit strained, but the support that China will give Russia comes from the very top. It comes from Xi Jinping. I mean, we know that the Chinese Foreign Ministry had more reservations about the kind of support China is giving to Russia, but who is the Chinese foreign minister or state council in charge of foreign affairs when it comes down to relationship with Russia? The big boss has said, yes, we support Putin and we support Russia. So there's a limit to how much China can backtrack from its open support for Putin given at the start of the Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm. And how important for Putin is a good relationship with China?
Oh, I think it's absolutely critical. I think the fact that Putin held back until after the Olympics was clearly a recognition that Chinese support is important, and therefore he could not possibly spoil Xi Jinping's party, which was the Beijing Olympics. And I think we have seen that in terms of the timing, that the invasion forces were in place, kind of in place, and yet Putin held back until right after the Olympics, and bang, the tanks start rolling.
And what do you think this means for the future with regards to China and Taiwan?
Well, Xi Jinping will ultimately use force to take Taiwan. He's made it very, very clear he is not going to allow this to be left for the next generation. He would expect to get it done because it is part of his China dream of national rejuvenation. Xi Jinping cannot make China great again if Xi Jinping cannot get what he calls a sacred territory like Taiwan and bring it into the fold of the Chinese state. So that's going to happen. If they are drawing the right lessons from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, then they will probably defer any plans they have to use force against Taiwan. Because what comes out clearly from the Ukrainian situation is the importance of preparation and being able to go according to their plan. An invasion of Taiwan is going to be a lot more complex and difficult than the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And do you think this has given China sort of an indication of what a Western response to such an invasion would be?
I think they are still watching it. They would still want to see how effective the Western sanctions on Russia would be, how much it would be sustained, and how much the Western alliance would be able to withstand efforts to divide and rule. The Chinese would be expecting the Western alliance to come up with something similar, perhaps even a bit more, before the Chinese use force against Taiwan. And if they think the Western alliance really talk bigger and deliver less, then I think the calculations will be that they will get away with it. I mean, after all, the Western economies are much more dependent on the Chinese economy than the economic sanctions on Russia will have on our own economy. And we are now talking about a bit of a living cost crisis in this country. I think if we are looking at that kind of equivalent actions being taken against China, we are going to see our standard of living substantially fall if we break off our economic relationship with China.
Well, Steve Zhang there joining us from Director of Political Studies at SOAS. Thank you so much for your time this morning. So now we're going to move on and talk to one of our reporters over in Poland. A reported 1.4 million Ukrainians have crossed borders since Vladimir Putin instigated a full-scale attack on February the 20th. The UN describes this as Europe's fastest-moving refugee crisis since the end of the Second World War. In Poland, over 750,000 civilians have arrived since the Ukraine invasion. Our reporter Paul Hawkins is there now, and he's been talking to some refugees. Joins us from Chelm, near the border with Ukraine. Paul, thank you. What is the latest on the ground at the moment?
Yeah, so you join us in Chelm, which is, we're about 20 kilometres from Dorohusk, the crossing there between Ukraine and Poland. And we've been there for the past couple of days seeing refugees as they come across the border, and we're now here at a registration centre. This is where we've been all morning. It's actually a converted sports hall, and this is where they come if they have any sort of plan at all. Then they tell the authorities, who then try to pair them up with transport to then make their onward journey to, frankly, anywhere in Europe. It could be somewhere else in Poland. We're going to talk to someone who's waiting for the bus to Lodz in just a minute. But they could be going to Belgium or Germany or France or anywhere else. Or some of them come here and they don't even have a plan. So we're just going to show you what's going on in here at the moment. There's some people to be collected. You can stay at this registration centre overnight. We'll show you where in just a moment. But yeah, some people here waiting to be collected. In a moment, there'll be a load of buses that turn up and drop people off and then take people away. So if we just walk inside here, this is the registration. This place has been open for about a week, and this is the system they've set up. So you come here and you register with the authorities. You give them your details. There's a Ukrainian desk, and then if we come over here, this desk, by the way, is set up so people can get SIM cards, Polish SIM cards, so they can stay in touch with their loved ones. because, of course, it's very difficult to stay in touch with some people in some parts of Ukraine at the moment. And then over here, if we just have a look over the desk, you can see there's loads of stuff that's been, and there's loads of centres like this all across the border that have gathered. I think this end tends to be more for the kids, really. There's some lots of baby food there, some nappies in the corner. We've got some water over here, and when people come here and they fill out the forms, they can then come over here. There are some books here for the kids, some drawing stuff. They can come over here, get some stuff. There's some food over on the other side as well. And then they can kind of, frankly, wait for the next bit of transport that they need. They do need to stay overnight. There is an
Oh, sadly, looks like we lost Paul there. That was Paul Hawkins joining us from Poland, showing us the inside of one of the centres that's been set up to help those who have fled from Ukraine. But stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're taking a look at drug policy reform at universities in the UK. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the Political Correction, and we've hopefully re-established our link with Paul over in Poland. Paul, can you hear us all right? We're just trying to connect to Paul. He's got more to show us at the refugee centre there in Poland. There he is. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diana. Just a replay. Yeah, we're at the refugee registration centre, about 20 kilometres from the border. We were just explaining the registration process, and if people do need to stay here overnight, they can stay in the sports hall there, which, you know, a month ago would have been full of people, playing basketball, five-a-side football, badminton, etc. It's now full of beds, about 400 beds. Around about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's full up normally every day, and in which case people have to come and sleep out here in the kind of waiting area where they're waiting for buses. Just to give you an idea of where we are. At the moment, it's a little bit quiet, but it quickly fills up. A couple of coach loads come in, and then this place gets full very quickly. And here they're giving out food to help with people on their onward journey. There's a lady just making some noodles there. So, mostly women and children here. Very few men, because of course, if you're aged 18 to 60 and you're from Ukraine and you don't have a medical exemption, then you can't go and then you have to go and fight in Ukraine. So mostly women and children here. Kiev. Hi, Lydia. Just tell us why you had to get out of Ukraine.
At 5 a.m. o'clock, I woke up because my mom told me that war has started. And after 10 days in the Kiev, we lived every day like depressed. We don't know what will happen next day. Every day we sleep and thought we want to wake up. So then we decided that we need to go because we are very tired. Then we left our dog, our cat, our father in Kiev, and now we are here.
I mean, and you work in pharmaceuticals. You sell pharmaceuticals for a living, yeah. And your sister's here. She's a medical student. Is that right? Yeah. And your mum's an estate agent, and you're here. I mean, how does it feel to be here now in this kind of situation?
Weird. I don't know, just weird. I feel like my neighbors just helped me because at my house just some conflict. I don't know what happened right now. I feel shocked a little bit.
But you stayed in Kiev for as long as you could, and then you had to leave because I guess you could hear the bombs and the missiles and the guns.
Yeah, we hear it every day, every night, especially night. It was crazy time. I don't know, they just feel power at the night like vampires and just started bombed us.
Have you been in regular contact with your father and your grandfather? Are they okay? Is the dog and the cat okay?
Yeah. Now they fine. My father wait for gun and to defend our country. My grandfather, he's very old, so he just defend our house like he can, take care of our dog, of our cat, and now it's hard in Kiev.
And you're safer here, and then from here you're going to go to
Lodz.
Lodz. Have you been to Lodz before in Poland?
Never have been in Poland. I want to take a trip to the Poland, but not in this conditions. But
not in this situation. You'd like to visit as a tourist, not as a refugee. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. And what will you do when you get to Lodz, do you know? Have you got somewhere to stay?
Yeah, we have some friends in the city, but our decisions take step by step. It's every time we think, okay, what's going to happen now, and then some people just help us in our step. Yeah. It's Poland people, it's Ukrainian people, every just help like they can. I'm shocked, I'm thankful.
Yeah. And how do you feel about Vladimir Putin?
Hate, just destroy our lives, destroy our plans for future. Every of us has plans. We want a trip, we want to study, we want to work, we want to love. Now it's only death, it's only war, cries. But I feel that our Ukrainian people, they become stronger after this. Yeah. And we will become stronger. I know it.
Thank you for speaking to us, Lydia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lydia's story is very familiar. We're speaking to so many of them here, and they're just kind of shocked that it still hasn't sunk in really that they're in this situation. They held out for as long as they could. And now they're on their way to... She hasn't even been to Poland before. Many people haven't been outside Ukraine before, and now they're having to get to grips with a new culture, a new language, and they don't know how long it's going to last for.
Well, Paul, thank you there. Paul Hawkins joining us from Poland. And I think Lydia's report there shows just the very real impact on Ukrainian citizens who are fleeing for their own safety, but also, I think, inspiring hearing her final words there, talking about how, hopefully, after all this, it'll make the Ukrainian people stronger. But send us your thoughts. What did you make of that hearing from Lydia? And lots of you have been getting in contact this morning. Paul?
Yeah, on Russia-Ukraine, Bill says, Dr. Johnson said, every man thinks meanly of himself for not being a soldier. How much more so when we can see them on TV?
Yeah, and Michael says, are the sanctions against Russia to be viewed as a deterrent or a punishment? I think the hope was early on as a deterrent, but but sadly now probably less so.
And Peter says ethnic Russians in Ukraine are certainly being mistreated at the hands of Russian shelling. We see it on our screens on a daily basis. Zelensky is just one of these Russian speakers. I mean, I'm not sure I entirely agree with that. I mean, in terms of the ethnic Russians in the east, I mean, a number of ethnic Russian civilians included have died over recent years since the hostilities began in 2014, and I think it's fair to say that even independent experts would say there's evidence of mistreatment of ethnic Russians in the east by the Ukrainian government. Now, of course, that doesn't, as we've said, justify Putin's invasion, but it does mean that there's a core issue there that isn't being addressed, and we should also focus on the ethnic Russians in the east as well.
We've got Ian here saying Europe's still taking gas from Russia right now. Does this mean that the sanctions are little more than smoke and mirrors? Well, I think this goes back to some discussions we've had a few times now on the political correction about our own energy security and how this has probably been a bit of a wake-up call, how we need to become much more self-sufficient across Europe, but also right here at home in the UK.
And Tony says Russia will destroy Europe if necessary. Well, when they go to war, they go to war. I think we're seeing that at the moment.
Absolutely. Arlene?
Yeah, David says any peace deal must include reparations to Ukraine. Russia must be made to pay for their terrible crimes. I think we would all agree with that. And then Ben says, am I the only one that thinks Ben Wallace is talking a load of to Putin when he says in the paper, don't test us? What has he done to help Ukraine? I know the UK has been good with aid, but that is not enough in my opinion. I have to say, I think Ben Wallace has been very much getting on with his job, Diana, whilst there was a bit of a psychodrama about other things in the Tory party. I actually think Ben is one of the good guys. He has been getting on with the job in defence and has actually been working very hard on this. So I don't actually think he's talking a load of X, Y and Z. I think he is actually saying we need to spend more on defence. We need to make sure that we have the proper equipment to defend ourselves and indeed to help those in Ukraine to defend themselves. So I don't agree with Ben on this occasion.
and nor do I on that particular comment. But do keep your views coming in. We love to hear them. Email us on gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. Now, a new report has been published this week examining the approach that universities take to drug use on campuses. The publication looks at whether a zero-tolerance approach is working, with particular concern about students' mental health and their willingness to come forward for help with substance abuse. The report argues that a public health approach needs to be adopted in order to tackle illicit drug use, such as those used for tobacco and alcohol abuse. So why has this report been published and what direction should be taken on the back of it? Well, I'm delighted to say that the co-authors of this report, Arda Ozbakuya, and the co-founder and director of Neurosite and professor of forensic psychology at the University of Durham, both join me now. Guys, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So just tell us a bit about your new publication. What drove you to write it?
Hi. So we've been observing that there is a problem in the higher education sector about illicit drug use. We see students dying due to drug-related causes every year, and the current policies haven't been effective at successfully addressing this problem. And that's why we wanted to write this report, suggesting that a zero-tolerance approach may cause more harm than good. So what we propose is a more tolerant approach, meaning a shift from criminal justice-based approaches to public health-based approaches.
And is that proposing a move towards a public health basis clearly for users, but would you argue that we need to decriminalise users as well as distributors?
Thanks very much for inviting us in. I mean, our report is about users, and my background on this was looking about concerns around mental health. Because it seems to me that there's been growing mental health problems in universities, and I think part of that has been exacerbated by the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic. And this may have led to more students turning to drugs. And it seems to me that if we're serious about trying to address mental health in our universities, then it's very important that we look at the area of drug usage and the interaction with drug usage and potential mental health issues, whether as a cause or effect of that usage. So that's that's the primary focus of our report on users and how we can help them to come forward and provide appropriate support. That's what we're advocating.
So would it be relying on students to effectively sort of self-refer and present themselves for treatment and for help?
Well, from my perspective, that'd be an important part of that, to let people know that if they come forward, we're not immediately going to go to the police or, seek to criminalise someone. What I wouldn't want is a student who is suffering from some mental health difficulties or some drug-related difficulty and not feel able to come forwards for fear that we may go to the police about them as our first port of call.
So in terms of mental health impacts, I suppose there are sort of two strands to this. One is the actual impact of addiction, but the other is the actual long-term impact of the use of psychotic substances. And I know that the report specifically talks about cannabis here.
Yeah, I mean, Aldo, is that one you want to pick up?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so of course there are sort of two impacts on mental health. The first is actually the impact of addiction itself, but the second is the actual use of psychotic substances and how that can impact. And your report specifically talks about the sort of recreational use of cannabis.
It doesn't only specify cannabis, it talks about all drugs, and it includes prescription drugs as well, because we've also observed that, during COVID especially, there was an increase in prescription drugs usage, such as benzodiazepines. So yeah, it's not just cannabis, but we think that, an approach based on public health and harm reduction better educates people on the long and short terms of risks of drug use. So yeah, concerns around long-term use is real, but that's exactly why we suggest harm reduction, so that we can ensure we can help more students before they develop a long-term habit. It's about being preventative, it's about being proactive and not just reactive at a point where that relationship between a student and drug use has already become problematic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would add, I think we need to be proactive with our students about letting them know of the dangers and problems with usage too. We don't need to wait until, as it were, they develop a drug habit. We want to intervene as early as we can as part of that program too, because we think some students come to universities with little knowledge of this area. It might be their first time experimenting with drugs. We see that as a time of potentially high risk where they're not aware of just how risky some of that behaviour is. So I think we need to take a proactive approach to try and discourage that. But if that discouragement doesn't work, and I think it won't work in all cases, then we need to then have an approach whereby students don't feel they can't come forward to us, because we think, if people don't report to us, we can't help them. With a lot of this, we could nip it in the bud if people feel able to come forward and report to us, and we would like to have the opportunity to try and do that. There's a Universities UK review of this area, which is a body representing universities, which is just starting, and I think it's born of concerns of the broader picture of mental health concerns, but also seeing drug usage going up in younger people too.
And do you find that there is kind of huge differences between universities in how they actually approach this issue?
Yes, there is a relation. Sorry.
No, after you, Hada.
All right. I was going to say there is variation both across universities, but also between universities. And again, that's a concern because it leads to, equality issues. Students get treated differently and disproportionately. And that's something we'd like to address as well.
Mm-hmm. And what interaction have you had with government so far about your reports? Have they been quite responsive?
There's no specific government response, but I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated one. This is a HEPI report, Higher Education Policy Institute report. I would hope it's on the government radar. I would hope that the government would see that. But most importantly for me, it's on the radio. It's on the radar of Universities UK. It's very clearly on their radar. They've been very supportive of the report in terms of a contribution to a fuller review of this genuinely challenging area. It's a difficult area. There's not easy answers to this area.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, Graham Towell and Arda Osbakuko there joining us on the publication of their report about drugs use in universities. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, send us your thoughts. What do you make of what's outlined there in the report, and would you support a more public health-led approach to drug use in universities? Now, former Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, has been awarded a knighthood for public service. The MP for South Staffordshire, who was elected to Parliament in 2010 and served as Defence Secretary and Secretary of State for Education during the pandemic, suffered a series of setbacks during his time in government. And this was always going to be a controversial appointment, but does that mean he doesn't deserve it? Paul, I think I need to come to you first on this, don't I?
I think he completely deserves it. He's clearly one of the best politicians we've got. No, look.
Why do I sense sarcasm?
It's an absolute nonsense, isn't it? I mean, look, Gavin Williamson has not had the most illustrious career as a politician, let's be honest about it. I think he was sacked as Defence Secretary because Theresa May found evidence that he'd leaked something to the press from some National Security Council meeting. We saw the debacle over the exams for the GCSEs during the COVID pandemic. And it seems to me that this is just, I think, something that smacks of the old boys network. That, you know, Gavin Williamson was somebody who clearly has done a lot for Boris Johnson in terms of supporting his prime ministership, supporting him as the leader of the Conservative Party, and it seems to me this is just a bit of payback. And I think, unfortunately, what it does do is it displays what is becoming, I think, the moral bankruptcy of the honours system. I mean, I basically believe in an honours system, but where, you know, people have genuinely contributed something to society, where they're held in high esteem for what they've achieved, not just because they happen to be good mates with the person at the top. So this will not go down well. I think it undermines the honour system generally. I think it's a huge misstep by the government, and I cannot understand why they've decided to make this award.
And Arlene, would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, Gavin is someone I know quite well because we worked together in the Confidence and Supply Agreement between the Conservative Party and the DUP back in 2017. He was very much involved at that time because he was Chief Whip before then. So not only was he Secretary of State for Defence, he was Secretary of State for Education most recently. Yes, had a difficult time, but who didn't have a difficult time in government, let's face it, during COVID, dealing with some huge problems. But he was Chief Whip for a long time as well. So I don't think we should just dismiss him as someone who was in Parliament not doing very much. He's someone who has clearly served the country, and I think it's wrong to just dismiss it in that way. And for goodness sake, we give, as a country, Tony Blair a knighthood, so don't start me on that.
Well, we had a good discussion on that a few weeks ago, didn't we, when that was announced? I think for me, the thing that I found the most kind of surprising about it is actually the timing. It seemed to come kind of a little bit out of the blue. Ordinarily, we see them in the sort of the New Year's honours list and the Queen's birthday honours list. But according to the Daily Mail, it was because back in January, when the New Year's honours list was announced, there was one of the sort of Partygate parties being investigated at the Department for Education, which the Met are now not investigating, which means that the honour has been bestowed. I think it's an interesting one. I'd be curious to hear your views at home. What do you think? Do you think that Gavin Williamson is deserving of his knighthood, or Sir Gavin, as we should perhaps now be calling him? Paul, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that it could actually be more beneficial moving forward if we took out political appointments by political parties and made it done on a more kind of cross-party public service perspective?
I just think it's whatever the system is, it's a question of judgment. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. And I can't imagine that anybody in government didn't realise that this was going to cause a reaction. I mean, I've got nothing against Gavin Williamson on a personal level, and as Arlene said, he's probably worked hard in Parliament. But if there were, if you took a poll of the public and you said, look, which politicians would you really object to being awarded a knighthood at this moment in time? I would imagine that Gavin Williamson would have been up there at the top of the tree. So even if people in government did feel he genuinely deserved it, sometimes you just have to exercise a bit of judgment. This is not going to go down well more widely amongst the public. It does undermine the honours system. We shouldn't do it.
Well, let us know from home. Now, coming up after the break, we're looking at politics across the pond after Joe Biden delivered his first State of the Union address. So don't go anywhere.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning, you're watching GB News, and coming up on the political correction, President Joe Biden gave his annual State of the Union address this week. What can we expect to see in American politics in the coming months? Well, we'll be joined by Sarah Elliott from Republicans Overseas UK. And 1 year on from the tragic murder of Sarah Everard, what have we learned from this horrific event? That plus plenty more after the latest news.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Russia says safe passage corridors are open again until 9 p.m. local time to allow residents of the Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Volnovakha to evacuate. It follows the collapse of an attempted ceasefire yesterday amid continued shelling. The UK is accusing Russia of using the temporary suspension of hostilities to regroup its forces. Ukrainian President Zelensky says Russia is preparing to bombard the city of Odessa. The Ministry of Defence is accusing Moscow of targeting populated areas in Ukraine. In an intelligence update, the MOD said Russia's bombardment is similar to tactics seen in Chechnya and Syria. Moscow denies it is targeting civilians. Analysts say the strength of Ukrainian resistance is slowing the Russian advance in the country. In a video address, President Zelensky praised his citizens for their efforts.
It is a special heroism to protest when your city is occupied, even temporarily. When you don't have a weapon, and in response to your protests, they shoot at you, but you don't run. When you're not armed, and an armoured personnel carrier is coming at you, but you do not move aside. That is why the occupation is temporary. It is artificial.
Over 1.5 million refugees have now left Ukraine for neighbouring countries over the last 10 days. The UN says it's the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab warned the conflict in Ukraine is likely to last months, if not years. British expat Thomas Jones has had to leave everything behind in Ukraine.
We managed to leave Ukraine last Saturday. Long queues, lines, panicking people, crying children. It was not something to be repeated.
The Prime Minister is calling on world leaders to make a renewed effort to ensure President Putin fails. Boris Johnson has unveiled a 6-point plan which ranges from humanitarian support to inflicting more economic pain on Moscow. President Putin says sanctions against Russia amount to declaring war. Mr. Johnson is due to host leaders from Canada, the Netherlands and Central Europe in London next week. President Joe Biden says the US is ready to increase its support in Ukraine and toughen its sanctions against Russia. In a phone call with President Zelensky overnight, President Biden said he was working to secure extra funding to provide humanitarian and economic aid. The two also discussed increasing the economic sanctions imposed on Moscow. Speaking in Moldova, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken also announced security assistance.
We are we're looking actively now at the question of airplanes that Poland may provide to Ukraine, and looking at how we might be able to backfill should Poland decide to produce those supply those planes. Can't speak to a timeline, but I can just tell you we're looking at it very, very actively.
Sir Keir Starmer is calling for action to prevent Russian oligarchs avoiding sanctions in the British courts. The Labour leader wants to fast-track new laws to stop rich Russians using their wealth to intimidate legal opponents. It's as opposition parties are urging the government to crack down on Russian dirty money. The new economic crime bill is due to be considered by MPs tomorrow. Visa and MasterCard are suspending all operations in Russia in response to its invasion of Ukraine. MasterCard said cards issued by Russian banks will no longer be supported by its network, and any card issued outside the country will not work at Russian stores or ATMs. The Visa chief executive says they've been compelled to act after the unacceptable events witnessed in Ukraine. In other news, Australian cricketer Shane Warne will be given a state funeral in his home country. Details of the public event to mark the leg spinner's death will be finalised in the coming days. The 52-year-old died of a suspected heart attack on Friday in Thailand. And two brothers have won Team GB's first gold in the Winter Paralympics in Beijing. Skier Neil Simpson and his guide and brother Andrew topped the podium in the men's Super G vision impaired class. 19-year-old Neil is the first British male athlete to win a gold medal on snow. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning, you're watching GB News and this is the Political Correction. As ever, we are here to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge. Coming up this hour, President Joe Biden gave his State of the Union address this week. We'll look at why Biden doesn't seem to be cutting through in the polls. 1 year on from Sarah Everard's tragic murder, how safe do women feel on our streets? And we'll have our Common Ground segment with the epoch of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London. We'll hear his thoughts on the situation in Ukraine. And don't forget to get involved by emailing us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is the Political Correction. This week, President Joe Biden gave his State of the Union address to Congress. The annual speech is one of the most significant days in the US's political calendar. So, as expected, the world's eyes and ears were on President Biden. He spoke extensively about the situation in Ukraine, lauding Western sanctions on Russia and pouring scorn on Vladimir Putin. He also attempted to tackle the fuel crisis and culture wars that have punctuated his presidency and interspersed his speech with a series of gaffes, including accidentally referencing Ukrainians as Iranians. But what does his speech mean for America, Ukraine, and indeed for Joe Biden himself? Well, joining us to discuss this now is Sarah Elliott from Republicans Overseas UK. Sarah, thank you for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
First brief question, what was your overall takeaway from President Biden's speech?
Well, it was largely unforgettable. Forgettable, I should say. It was a real opportunity for him to reset his presidency and his flailing numbers, some of the worst in modern presidential history at the moment. But there were some good bipartisan moments and clapping, and then there were also just basically a laundry list of progressive liberal ideas that he doesn't even have the votes for from his own party. So it really lacked, I think, a unifying message for the country, which we desperately need in the United States right now. It also, the high points of it were, of course, strengthening NATO, his full support behind the alliance, which got bipartisan support. Funny enough, he's changed his tune on defunding the police. He said, fund the police, secure the southern border. That also received bipartisan support. But it didn't actually seem like a wartime speech where he could have really brought everyone together behind the flag in support of Ukraine in the sense of increasing military spending. We've seen Germany rise to the occasion most recently, but there was no talk of changing from domestic priorities to international priorities. And there was also no mention of stopping importing oil from Russia itself and becoming energy independent again, which we were under President Trump. So it seems more of the same, lackluster, and even his supporters didn't think it cut the mustard.
Well, on that, let's talk about his specific pledge that he doesn't want to defund the police, because, of course, there are some on the sort of left of the Democrats who have been calling for that for a long time, and it seems a bit of a change in tune. Do you think that's President Biden trying to sort of appeal more to the centre, given his poll ratings?
I think it definitely has something to do with his poll ratings. I mean, he's at 37% approval, 55% disapproval right now. But also, it's a reflection of some of the elections that have taken place in November, just a few months ago. In Minneapolis, where George Floyd unfortunately, died, and that horrible case happened, and the heart of defund the police movement. Well, guess what? Those policies failed at the ballot box. So even in Minneapolis, liberal Minneapolis, they want to fund a police force. We're seeing skyrocketing crime in American cities, and also we're seeing a rise of the parents coming to defend their kids against COVID mandates and mask mandates. And it seemed that the progressive left were more concerned about tearing down statues and renaming schools than actually getting the kids back in the classroom. And in San Francisco, the most liberal city in the most liberal state of California, 3 school board members by 70% were kicked off. So I think he's reading the tea leaves around the country, and he knows that these policies aren't that popular. However, in his speech, he still doubled down on climate change policies, which of course will keep prices rising, energy prices rising for Americans. And he still wants to push more government spending, which we know increases inflation. And inflation's at the highest it has been in 40 years, at 7.5%. So his policies don't seem to be changing all that much, but his rhetoric at times trying to appeal more to the middle.
Well, certainly the narrative there around the culture wars, because you referenced, pulling down statues, and we've seen a little bit of that sort of playing out here in the UK too. Do you think Biden is right to really try and sort of get away, or certainly claim that he's trying to get away from that sort of culture war sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, he was supposed to be a moderate president. He was supposed to unify the country after the Trump years. And I think the country is yearning for that. And he needs, if he could, silence the progressive left, that would be welcomed. And quite frankly, the policies coming out from the progressive left, terrify a lot of Americans, including myself. So it would be nice to move the needle more to the center. But, the extreme of his party are definitely leading the charge. So it will be difficult for him. And he doesn't really seem to be commanding a lead in the party. He seems to be following the party. And, a lot of people think he's not really up to the job behind the podium, even articulating a message. Energy levels, he seems to be wandering. There's a really... he's not an inspiring leader for many people at the moment.
Well, I want to talk about a specific moment in his speech. And Arlene, I kind of want to come to you on this, because as First Minister, you made some pretty important kind of cornerstone speeches. And we're always conscious as politicians about making gaffes, aren't we? And yet we saw President Biden refer to Ukrainians as Iranians, which, slip of the tongue or otherwise, was not a particularly comfortable moment for him, was it?
No, and I mean, this is the big moment. This is the theatre of American politics, the State of the Union address. And if it was a one-off, I think most people would forgive it because Ukrainian Iranians, it's probably quite easy to do in a full flow of a huge speech. But since then, he's talked about Putin invading Russia in an interview. And he continues to make these mistakes. And I think it is indicative of his state of mind and is very concerning, I have to say. We look also at who sits behind him, and of course that's Vice President Kamala Harris. And she would be, and this is a question for Sarah, presumably very much from that sort of woke liberal agenda that Sarah's been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul, I kind of want to come to you on this, because aren't there so many kind of parallels between the Democrats in their current form and the sort of pressures from the left of the party and actually what's going on here in the UK with the Labour Party?
I think there are very striking parallels, actually, in the same way that the Labour Party went off some years ago to being a much more kind of middle-class, metropolitan, woke party for student radicals and social activists and urban liberals. I sense that the Democrats have gone the same way. And I think in many respects it's a tragedy for both parties and for both countries. I mean, I'm on the left. I want to see a Labour Party in this country that's in touch with the mainstream. I want to see a Democrat Party in America that's in touch with the mainstream. But the reality is, the further these parties have gone off on that agenda, the more the chasm has opened up in terms of the culture war. And then you see somebody like Trump comes to the fore because people think, well, he will speak for us in a way that these people no longer do. The potential rise of populist politicians in Britain. So it's a warning, really, I think, that you lose your core base. And what happened to the Labour Party in 2019 was directly as a result of that. And the worst thing the Labour Party can do is to take the message from America that, well, the Democrats managed to win again, therefore we don't really need to change. I think that would be the completely wrong interpretation to take.
Well, as well as the State of the Union dominating American headlines, electoral activity in the US is also heating up. The Republicans are eyeing up reclaiming a majority in the House of Representatives, with the 2024 presidential election also gaining momentum. With President Biden's administration being hammered by successive crises, along with Donald Trump teasing another go at the White House, what can we expect to see unfold in the US in the coming months? OK, Sarah, I want your analysis. What are you expecting to see in the sort of, let's say, 6 months looking ahead?
OK, so November, I think we're going to see the Republicans have a huge tsunami wave and take over the House. I have a feeling we'll also take over the Senate. That's a little more difficult. There's 21 seats, Republican seats up that we have to hold, and then we have to grab an extra 3. But I think what the trends are, I think that's likely. And then 6 months after that, we're into a presidential election year and all gloves are off. It does look like Donald Trump will run again. He made that clear at CPAC. I mean, not directly, but he inferred enough that his supporters are very excited. But I'm still not 100% convinced he'll run. He does have competition. His competition with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, his own Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, his former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. They're all, and maybe even U.S. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. So they're all very popular, especially Ron DeSantis, and they're all not Trump. And that also makes them very popular with the overall party and with the chance of winning a general election. But again, with Biden's poll numbers in the tank and with Trump beating Biden in polls at the moment, that's very salivating for Mr. Trump not to get back in. But it's still a lot of time in politics.
So it is a lot of time, but I'm going to ask you a direct question, Sarah. If I was to give you sort of £10 to place a bet on who is going to be the next Republican presidential candidate, who do you think it'd be based on the current situation?
We're going to go and I'm going to pay you this or you'll pay me this, all right? Okay.
Absolutely.
This is a real bet. Okay, I'm going to say Ron DeSantis.
Okay, good. We will hold you to that. We'll have you back here once the candidate is announced and we'll talk about it again. I suppose one question that I'm always kind of curious about, and Paul and Arlene, I want to bring you in on this too, is looking back at sort of US presidents throughout history. Trump clearly in recent years has been a very kind of controversial, divisive figure. But who would you say your kind of favourite and kind of most inspiring presidents are Arlene, I'll come to you first on this.
Well, I don't think it's any surprise who I'm going to say. I think that Ronald Reagan was an outstanding president, and I think the relationship that there was between the United Kingdom and the United States at that time made us both very strong and formidable. And so I'll say I'm going to pick Ronald Reagan.
Paul?
Well, a big boo to that from me.
We're surprised.
I've never been particularly inspired by American presidents, I have to say. No offence, Sarah, but I haven't been particularly. But somebody who came very close, I think, to making it to president, never quite made it, was Bobby Kennedy. I think he played a huge role in terms of the civil rights movement in America, tried to heal America at a time when it was very fiercely divided and was very forward-thinking and visionary. Sadly, like his brother, was assassinated and possibly would have gone on to gain the presidency. So he would have been, for me, the best president who never was.
And Sarah?
Well, there's no question. Ronald Reagan, I have to agree with Arlene. I mean, peace through strength, strong economic record, and also just this American optimism and communication style that just made all of us feel good to be Americans again, and we need that to return.
Yeah, well, somewhere in this newsroom on your way out, you'll see there is a Ronald Reagan notebook that one of our producers have. So we've got another fan in the building as well. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining us this morning. And stay with us, because coming up after the break, we will discuss how safe do women feel 1 year on from Sarah Everard's murder. And Roman Abramovich puts Chelsea FC up for sale. We'll talk about this with sports commentator Aidan McGee, and Common Ground with Ukrainian Catholic Bishop. Remember to send us your views to gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. You're watching The Political Correction. Don't go anywhere.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. And dry for many as we head through the morning, though some showers in the south. So looking at the details for you, and in the southwest, there are going to be some breaks in the cloud, though it won't be as sunny as yesterday. Some showers are likely around North Devon by lunchtime.
It is set to be cloudier across the London area, but further southeast in Sussex and Kent, we should still have some decent sunshine.
The best of the sunshine for Wales will be in the north. Further south, there'll be variable amounts of cloud and a few showers too.
And then a similar picture looking at the Midlands. Most areas will see some sunny breaks this lunchtime, but the more prolonged sunshine will be a bit further north. A few showers can't be ruled out in the south.
Now, plenty of sunny weather is on the cards for the northeast, with highs of 7 or 8 Celsius, so it is a bit chilly, but the sunshine is going to make up for that.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, it's also going to be a very sunny day. Any overnight fog will have cleared through the morning to leave this fine by lunchtime, though breezy in the northwest.
Now, similar across Northern Ireland for you today. There's going to be lots of sunshine with highs of around 7 or 8 and just a little bit of fair weather cloud.
And the showers in the south gradually will die out, leaving things fine and dry by the end of the day. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that has been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here.
Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Well, welcome back, and loads of you have been getting in touch with your views. Paul?
Yes, on Russia and Ukraine, Kevin says NATO is a defensive organisation and was not allowing Ukraine in. The democracies that have been allowed in wanted to join. Russia should not be allowed to have a veto over independent states. I mean, I guess it's often said that NATO is a defensive organisation. I mean, I guess when you look at the bombing of Serbia and of Libya as well more recently, whether or not you agree with those particular military operations, I mean, it strikes me that you can't really particularly describe them as defensive in the sense that, you know, NATO wasn't coming to the aid of a member state. The question really is whether it's wise in the tinderbox that is the Russian border to offer NATO membership there. But that's a long-running debate, isn't it?
It is, and one we've had a few times on this show already. Raymond here says, oh, you like this one, Paul? Totally agree with Paul, right, Eastern Ukraine. And in the end, Putin will not leave Eastern Ukraine. Continuing the war, there won't be a country left.
And Jane says, agree that there is no balanced objective appraisal of why we are here. We were the aggressors in Libya, Iraq, Iran. I mean, there is that, you know, there is that side of it as well, isn't there? I mean, we were talking earlier about the Russophobia, and Russia being banned from taking part in sporting competitions. Many people would say, well, look, the UK and the US launched a war of aggression against Iraq in 2003. Would it have been right for, you know, England to have been banned from the World Cup, for example? Are there double standards here? I suspect some people would conclude there probably are.
Well, we have Susan here who says Putin is a very troubled man, but we cannot give in to a man who threatens nuclear and chemical weapons. And Seabrook on the nuclear point says, let Putin fire one missile and he knows he will be vaporised and his beloved Russia. Well, that is the whole mutually assured destruction argument, isn't it, for why the nuclear button perhaps wouldn't be pressed.
And Alan says, let's not forget who is behind Ukraine, the US and other nefarious forces. Try putting nuclear arms in Cuba and see how America would act.
Well, thank you for sending in your views, and do keep them coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But now we're going to move on, because this week marks 1 year since the tragic murder of Sarah Everard by police officer Wayne Couzens. This horrific crime sparked national outrage and reopened debates over the safety of women and girls, as well as raising questions about the internal culture within the police force about attitudes towards female citizens. So 1 year on, how safe do women and girls feel in Britain? What lessons have been learned on the back of this tragedy, and what more needs to be done? Well, the government has done quite a lot, haven't they? I mean, there's the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. There is now a two-pronged inquiry that's been announced with Dame Eilish Angionalis. She's going to be chairing that. That was announced in November. We've had independent police investigations into conduct at the Met. We've had a whole raft of funding for domestic abuse charities and support networks. We've had the new Street Safe app. We've had the Home Secretary who said they're going to accept and implement all recommendations from the National Police Chiefs Council on women and girls in their inspection that was commissioned last year. That and a whole raft more in terms of violence against women and girls strategy. But I think my concern is I'm not sure yet it's filtering through into women actually feeling safer on the street. Arlene, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that is right. I think the dreadful death of Sarah Everard did shine a light on what we as a society were doing around violence against women and girls here in Northern Ireland. There's a new strategy being developed at this moment in time, but certainly that doesn't feel, you can have government strategies, but what way does it make women feel on the ground? And I don't think they feel any safer from what has happened. Indeed, we had a terrible incident here in Northern Ireland where a man was killed by his partner, and in the pre-trial hearing it came out that there was a lot of domestic violence involved in all of that. So I think that the home is a private space. I accept that, and we're talking about women on the violence on our streets, obviously, when we were talking about Sarah Everard, who was just walking home. But certainly domestic violence is something that still continues, not just against women and obviously against men in some cases as well, but against little children. And I was really struck by the fact that there was a story on Friday, which, because of all that's going on in terms of Ukraine, was missed again, that a little boy in South London, Kyril Matthews, 2 years of age, murdered by his partner's boyfriend. And that's going on. And I think there's a real issue around our services in terms of social workers, in terms of the support that they need to be able to give. I'm not criticising social workers because I know they're under incredible pressure, but we do need to look at that whole system and the fact that there are a lot of very vulnerable young children living in violent households, and how are we going to deal with that? So it's a huge issue. I accept all of that. But to your question about do women feel safer 1 year on, I'm sorry to say that I don't think they do.
And Paul, something that I found very interesting this week, the government launched its new campaign called the Enough campaign. I think up to now, a lot of the emphasis has been on women kind of reporting crimes and speaking out about how we can feel safer. But this campaign is a little bit different because it's putting more of an emphasis on kind of male behaviours and asking blokes to kind of call out bad behaviour in their sort of friends and colleagues when they see it. Do you think that's the right approach?
I think in the proper context it is. I mean, you know, I would want to avoid a situation where people are told they have to challenge banter, for example, and, you know, we're getting into the area where some people are suggesting that wolf whistling a woman should become a crime. I'm very uncomfortable about that kind of thing. But certainly in terms of abuse, physical abuse, violence against women, you can never treat that too seriously, in my view. And I'm conscious I'm a man, so I certainly don't speak with the personal authority that women would be able to in this debate. But on the Sarah Everard thing, I have to say that one thing that has slightly concerned me, and I say this as the father of a daughter, is the narrative that's developed that somehow the police are a threat to women. Now, clearly what happened to Sarah Everard was horrific, and for a police officer to have been responsible, I think shocked us all. But it was still a very, very isolated incident. The vast majority of police officers are decent people, and we don't want to get into a situation where we say to women, look, if you're out and you're in a vulnerable situation, you shouldn't approach a police officer because they're not safe and they're not to be trusted. That's not the message I would want to give my daughter. And I don't think it's a message we would want to convey more widely.
I agree. I mean, I think our police officers are the vast majority are complete heroes, and the dedication they put into their service is really quite inspiring. But I think it's what makes it so sickening when you see horrific cases like Sarah Everard, but also the kind of investigation in the Metropolitan Police about some of the sort of WhatsApp messages and things that were exchanged between officers that I think was hidden as banter, but some of it was really horrendous, seeing reports in the papers. Arlene, what did you make of the outcome of that report?
Well, of course, it led to the downfall of the Commissioner because the Mayor felt that she wasn't being serious enough in relation to dealing with that issue. and it was the latest in a long line of big issues that she had to deal with in the Metropolitan Police. We discussed this issue at the time around Cressida Dick's resignation. I do think there were issues to be dealt with. She is at the top of the tree, therefore she felt that the buck stopped with her. I do, however, think that there are others below that need to step up and deal with these issues in relation to junior officers who are sending quite unacceptable material around, albeit in a WhatsApp group. It's not for public consumption, but I think it goes to the state of mind of these guys who are meant to be. And as you say, and I totally agree with Paul, I believe that our police officers do an amazing job. I do think that we should encourage our young people to look to them as a source of authority and safety. But if we find that there are police officers sharing that sort of material, then there needs to be action, and it cannot be
absolutely.
done.
Well, our thoughts and prayers with Sarah Everard's family on this anniversary of her death, and obviously seeing the coverage of it must be really difficult. So our thoughts and prayers with them. But stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're joined by sports journalist Ada McGee to discuss the biggest stories in the world of sport.
It's 11:33. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Fresh attempts to evacuate residents from the Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Volnovakha are underway after Russia agreed another temporary ceasefire. It follows the collapse of an agreed ceasefire yesterday amid continued shelling. The UK is accusing Russia of using the temporary suspension of hostilities to regroup its forces. Mariupol's mayor Vadim Boychenko says as many as 400,000 people are stuck in the southeastern city.
During the first days of the war, we counted the victims in tens. Today, we count them in hundreds, and in 2 days' time, we'll likely count them in thousands. They will not give us an opportunity to count the wounded and the killed, because the shelling has not stopped for the past 6 days.
The Ministry of Defence is accusing Moscow of targeting populated areas in Ukraine. In an intelligence update, the MOD said Russia's bombardment is similar to tactics seen in Chechnya and Syria. Moscow denies it's targeting civilians. Analysts say the strength of Ukrainian resistance is slowing the Russian advance in the country. Well, over 1.5 million refugees have now left Ukraine for neighbouring countries over the last 10 days. The UN says it's the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, warned the conflict in Ukraine is likely to last months, if not years. The Prime Minister is calling on world leaders to make a renewed effort to ensure President Putin fails. Boris Johnson's unveiled a 6-point plan which ranges from humanitarian support to inflicting more economic pain on Moscow. President Putin says sanctions against Russia amount to declaring war. Mr. Johnson is due to host leaders from Canada, the Netherlands and Central Europe in London next week. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Shortly, we'll be back with the political correction.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to The Political Correction, and lots of you have been getting in touch. Paul?
Yeah, Linda says, why kick Russian students out of any country? This war is not in their name. When you have collective punishment like this, it's always only the ordinary people who suffer.
Well, we've got Sally here who says we totally disagree with Liz Truss. The population is not prepared to pay energy price increases in the way she put it. Boris and Rishi have no idea how we ordinary people are living.
And Colin says the cost of gas and electric bills was already going up before this war in Ukraine, so they can't use that as a get-out clause for higher bills.
And we've got Stuart here who takes quite a strong stance, saying that all Russians should be expelled and we should have a complete trade ban, including gas. It will hurt our pockets, but so be it.
And Mark says, if our government makes a decision to go to war with Russia and a nuclear bomb drops on the UK, then that affects me as an individual when I didn't choose my government's actions.
Interesting one. And we've got a few coming in about Gavin Williamson as well. So Michael says, totally agree that knighthood should be awarded at the end of someone's career, so a proper assessment of their achievements can be undertaken. And Lizzie, why so nasty about Williamson? There are many other ill-deserving knights to go for. Well, thank you, and do keep them coming in. Now, this week, Roman Abramovich announced he'd made the decision to put Chelsea Football Club up for sale, saying in a statement on Wednesday that it was in the best interest of the club. Last week on The Political Correction, we discussed his decision to transfer the stewardship and care of the club to its trustees in light of the ongoing situation in Ukraine. And now he's gone a step further. Joining us to discuss this is sports broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee. So Aidan, give us a rundown. What is the latest?
Well, it's not really moved much this weekend, Deanna, it has to be said, but we saw last week he placed the club in the hand of the stewardship, if you like, or placed the stewardship of the club in the hand of a charitable foundation. Things did move quickly there from the point of view that the government looked as if they were going to impose sanctions quite quickly. I don't think they're finding it that easy to do that. That's probably given him some breathing space in terms of finding a suitable buyer for the club. The objection from the charitable foundation was that it might actually contravene some of the rules laid down by the charitable commission. So that route wasn't particularly easy. And by the middle of the week, we realised that he was putting the club up for sale. They had the FA Cup tie against Luton. The manager spoke out afterwards and saying it was already having an unsettling and destabilising effect on the players. But in terms of who it goes to next, you can be sure that anyone who's been linked with it so far is probably not a serious bidder. Now, I know from covering takeover stories at various different Premier League clubs over the last 10 to 15 years that these deals tend to be done in secret, especially when we're talking about a really, really big club. We remember Manchester City got taken over overnight. I knew somebody was working at Manchester City at that time, and that she only found out about it literally within a few minutes of it going live on the media, and she was actually working day to day at the club. Chelsea itself bought for £140 million back in 2003 by Roman Abramovich. That deal was done in secret. Barely anybody on these shores knew who Abramovich was. So you have to understand as well that the kind of person willing to take this club on, the outgoings are very, very strong. You need to be able to dedicate time to it. You're probably looking at somebody who's even wealthier than Roman Abramovich when you consider the asking price, the running costs. It does generate revenue, hefty revenue, £440 million a year. It made a profit 2 summers ago of £40 million as well. So in the context of COVID and last year's loss of £146 million, that's not too bad. Then we look at the match day revenue, around about £2 million. So there are reasons to go for it, but then you've got this issue of the stadium. Eventually they will need a new stadium, so somebody is going to have to find another £1 billion to source a new or to build a new stadium in what, let's face it, is one of the biggest or most expensive, rather, postcodes in the whole of the world.
Mm-hmm. And do you expect, given the sort of speed of the sale, that someone's going to get a slightly sort of cut price deal on Chelsea?
I would have said that a few days ago, but I was talking to someone this morning and he said to me, Roman doesn't really need the money. He will sell to the appropriate bidder. He wants to leave it in good hands. He's given a lot to football. He didn't do it to make money. Yes, he's delivered, some would say 19 or 21 major trophies if you include community shields. He wasn't really in it for the money. I mean, football isn't something you go into for money. Sometimes the profit is not seen on the balance sheet, as somebody once put it to me. But I think a sale will happen quickly, but the right buyer has to be found. There are hedge funds working on it in Monaco that I've been told about. We obviously know about the Merchant Bank in New York that's trying to sell the club as well. So when the appropriate buyer is found, I think we'll see things move quite quickly, but it won't be anybody who's been linked with it so far. Of that, I can be relatively certain about.
And one quick final question. What do you anticipate the impact of a sort of a sale and takeover would actually be on the fans? Because I'm sure they're quite concerned about what the future of their club looks like.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, one thing I don't want to be hearing is various people's, like the guy in Switzerland, the 86-year-old man, saying it was too expensive. What was his name? Hans Heuberg said that it was too expensive. So that just rings alarm bells that you haven't got the money to finance the club on a day-to-day basis. He also said that he wanted to set up a consortium to take the club on. That just says to people that he hasn't got the money himself. He's relying on favours, calling in favours to try and keep or grease the wheels of the club. That would be the phrase going forward. The fans want to hear about investment. They want to hear about a new stadium. They want to hear about new players. They want to hear about the kind of investment which is going to keep the club or maintain its position as an elite super club. They are the world and European champions, and the fans expect them to stay there, Diana.
Mm-hmm. Well, Aidan, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your insights this morning, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this again for the weeks to come as this situation unfolds. But I think it has been sort of really interesting over the past week and a half or so, just seeing the sanctions that have been placed on individuals, because we know that some of these oligarchs are really in the big money and have huge investments here in the UK, not least Roman Abramovich, one of perhaps the most well-known. But not only are we seeing sanctions on oligarchs, it's been interesting in this new kind of social media TikTok generation, seeing the response of some of the children of the oligarchs. And there was one who actually posted on their Snapchat, "No to war." So perhaps this is a new generation that is looking at things a little bit differently. Now, Sunday is a special day for Christians, but we acknowledge that faith comes in all shapes and sizes. And each week on The Political Correction, we aim to talk to someone at the heart of his or her community, to talk about what brings us together, in other words, our common ground. And this week is particularly special as we're joined by Bishop Kenneth Novakovsky from the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Eparchy in London. Your Grace, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. So just a broad question first. I mean, how have you been feeling seeing what's been unfolding in Ukraine over the past few weeks?
Well, certainly about 10 days ago when I woke up, and like everybody else, I turned on my mobile phone and read the news and my heart broke. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been the similar reaction to not only Ukrainians in the United Kingdom, but everybody around the world to see what is going on, the invasion and the absolute destruction of this wonderful, beautiful country.
Mm-hmm. And you got a visit, didn't you? Was it a few days ago from the Prime Minister? How did that feel, knowing you'd kind of got the support of our country's leader?
Well, exactly 1 week ago, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, came to our cathedral and prayed with us, lit a candle, but also had an opportunity to meet with several of the Ukrainian community's leaders here in the United Kingdom. And we were able to speak very candidly with the Prime Minister, explain to him our situation, our concerns, and we were very grateful to him for listening to us and for, I believe, really understanding our situation.
Mm-hmm. And what has your sort of response been to how kind of the West has come together to offer their support for Ukraine?
Well, I think that what we've seen is the West has never been more united since who knows when, as they are over the situation in Ukraine, the war that's being waged against Ukraine, the war that started 8 years ago and has certainly escalated in horrific terms.
Mm-hmm.
Bishop, I was interested in your opinion on the Russian Orthodox Church, because it has come under some criticism for not speaking out full-throatedly in condemnation against Putin's actions. And some people have suggested, well, the Russian the Orthodox Church these days is in the pocket, really, of Putin, and there's a bit of an incestuous relationship going on there. Have you been disappointed by the Russian Orthodox Church's position? Do you think they should be more straightforward in condemning what's going on?
Well, I think all world leaders, church leaders in general, should be very, I would say, supportive of the Ukrainian people and the plight of this. And we certainly know that there are many, many Orthodox faithful who are standing united with Ukraine and standing united with the situation. And I would just hope that church leaders throughout the world would condemn this violence and stand for peace in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. And I know certainly in my own community, I've had a lot of my own constituents contact me asking practically what they can do to help. What would you say is the best way that people can help? Is it through, making donations or?
Well, I think that first and foremost, what people can do in their homes, together in their communities, is make peace amongst themselves. Today, in the Orthodox world and in the Eastern Catholic world, we consider this Forgiveness Sunday, and we're asked how hard it might be to forgive each other and to ask for forgiveness. So I think, first of all, we need to make peace in our own home, in our neighborhoods, and in the communities that we live in. Secondly, I think we need to pray for peace, pray for not only a military victory, but also a spiritual victory. And the ironic thing about all of this is, if the defeat of Putin happens, that will probably mean the liberation of the Russian people. I think that if people can donate to reputable organizations that are here in the United Kingdom that have people on the ground in Ukraine and also Poland. This last Wednesday we had a visit of the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall, and they brought with them 4 organizations that the Prince himself is patron of. And by bringing them, it was really a way of encouraging people to make donations to those organizations that are helping people in Ukraine and also the refugees that are spilling into Poland and other countries bordering Ukraine.
Bishop, can I just ask, what role today does faith play in places like Ukraine? Because I'm thinking in the days of the Soviet Union, when religion, Christianity was very much suppressed and people were persecuted. Has there, after the collapse of Soviet communism, been something of a blossoming of religion in countries like Ukraine? Does it play a central role in society today in a way that it didn't previously?
Well, we know that there was a sociological survey done way back in 2019, that seems decades ago now, that showed that over 80% of Ukrainian people believe in God regardless of what their religious background is, whether it's Christianity, Islam, or Judaism. And I think that faith, certainly in Ukraine, is part of the psyche, the mentality, the life of Ukrainian citizens. And I think the role of church leaders and the church in general is to provide hope to these people, to provide hope to, I think, people here in the United Kingdom. Because I think that when we have hope and when we feel that we belong to a family, we can overcome even the most challenging and difficult times.
Arlene?
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, I've been really struck by listening to some of your followers in Ukraine and how they have really strengthened in their faith as a result of what's been happening in Ukraine. And it's really interesting to hear you speak about what other faiths can do to support those in Ukraine under such terrible aggression at this moment in time. Practically, we can obviously go out and send over equipment and all of that. But surely, as people of faith, we also need to seek God's face and pray about what is happening in Ukraine at this time.
Your Grace?
Well, I absolutely echo that. I think when people come together, especially as Christians, we know that Jesus said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there with you. Last week, unfortunately, because of martial law in Ukraine, all places of worship had to be empty because people couldn't come out onto the streets. And so I think everybody here in the United Kingdom made a special effort in our Ukrainian Orthodox churches, in our Ukrainian Catholic churches, and in churches in general. I think people made a concerted effort to be in church that last Sunday so that they could pray for and pray with those who are having to pray in the bunkers, in the basements of their homes, and also to pray with those who are on the front line defending Ukraine.
Yeah, and I was really struck, Bishop, about the fact that services were happening in bomb shelters. I mean, we saw the beautiful pictures from your wonderful cathedral in London, but to be able to seek God's face in a place where they're sheltering from attack sends out a very powerful message, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and it shows the unity of people throughout the world that are able to come together in prayer.
And Bishop, I just wanted your view on the evidence, some of which suggests that there has been, over the last 7 or 8 years, mistreatment and persecution of groups of ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine. I wonder what you would say about that, and whether your prayers would include, praying for people in those regions too.
Well, I think, first of all, I'm not really sure that there was persecution of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. I think that in general, over the last 8 years, we have seen this as a hybrid war. And, I'm sure that there have been disputes amongst people of various different ethnic groups in Ukraine. But in general, I think that Ukraine, the citizens of Ukraine, have turned their back on what was the Soviet Union and turned their back on Russia and want to be part of Europe. And I think that this can be a threat to Mr. Putin if his people are looking over the fence and saying, how come they can do that and we can't?
So I think at times like this, we see cases of terrible hardship, but we also see wonderful displays of humanity with people coming together to kind of show their support for their neighbours. What would you say is the most sort of inspiring thing that you've seen within your own community?
Well, I certainly think that the outpouring of friendship, of kindness, of generosity amongst the people here in the United Kingdom has been overwhelming. But I was also reading a note from the president of Poland where he said when Russia began to fire on Ukrainians, Poland opened up its borders and its hearts to Ukrainians. And I think such acts, such words, such meaningful gestures are just incredible. And we've seen this all over the place. Today at our cathedral, at the end of one of our services, the Salvation Army came out and was playing a few hymns to be in solidarity and support with us.
Mm-hmm. Well, Your Grace, thank you so much for joining us this morning in what must be an incredibly busy and difficult time for your community. But we certainly really appreciate it. And is there kind of one final thought that you'd like to give to perhaps Ukrainians here in the UK who are seeing what's happening to their home nation?
Well, again, as I said, today is what we refer to in the Orthodox churches and in Eastern Catholic churches, Forgiveness Sunday. And so certainly we ask for forgiveness for any things that we have done to harm anybody, and we also ask for your forgiveness. And so I would say, pray and stand with Ukraine.
Brilliant. Thank you, Your Grace. And Paul and Arlene, thank you as always for your views. I think we've had some great debates here this morning, and I certainly think our thoughts and prayers with all those in Ukraine witnessing some of these atrocities, but also, the families of Ukrainians. I can't believe how difficult this situation must be. But thank you to you guys at home for getting in touch with us, sending us loads of views. I mean, look at all this paper. This is you guys and your thoughts and your views. We've had plenty more than this coming in, because that's what we're all about here at GB News. We're about good, honest debate, and we're about hearing from you, because it's not about politicians talking to politicians. It's about what you guys think. Thank you for tuning in. This is GB News. You've been watching The Political Correction. Tune in next week at 10 a.m. for more political debate analysis, and we'll cover the stories that you care about. Up next, Alistair Stewart has a great show coming up for you, joined by Christopher Mayer, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, and more. See you soon.
Let's have a look at the weather for you. And dry for many as we head through the morning, though some showers in the south. So looking at the details for you, and in the southwest are going to be some breaks in the cloud, though it won't be as sunny as yesterday. Some showers are likely around North Devon by lunchtime.
It is set to be cloudier across the London area,
But further southeast in Sussex and Kent, we should still have some decent sunshine.
The best of the sunshine for Wales will be in the north. Further south, there'll be variable amounts of cloud and a few showers too.
And then a similar picture looking at the Midlands. Most areas will see some sunny breaks this lunchtime, but the more prolonged sunshine will be a bit further north. A few showers can't be ruled out in the south.
Now, plenty of sunny weather is on the cards for the northeast, with highs of 7 or 8 Celsius, so it is a bit chilly, but the sunshine is going to make up for that.
Meanwhile, in Scotland, it's also going to be a very sunny day. Any overnight fog will have cleared through the morning to leave this fine by lunchtime, though breezy in the northwest.
Now, similar across Northern Ireland for you today. There's going to be lots of sunshine with highs of around 7 or 8 and just